What a joy it is to look out at you, beloved friends, who I am yet to get to know. I am Reverend Jason Lydon. I serve the Second Unitarian Church of Chicago, and Reverend Hannah is there this morning, and I get to be here with you. And it is such a joy to get to do so and be in your space and worship in your community. Before I share my sermon this morning, I want to share a short poem with you. This poem is from Palestinian poet Rifat al-Hariri, entitled Kite of Gaza. If I must die, you must live. To tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some string, make it white with a long tail. So a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eyes, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite, you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale. Unfortunately, he did indeed die. Be not afraid. This is the message we heard from the angels speaking to the shepherds during the Christmas season we recently passed. It's a message that crosses traditions. We hear it from the ancient Hebrew prophet Isaiah and the prophet of Islam, Muhammad, the 16th century humanist scholar Olympia Murata, and many others. Be not afraid. We're given another message, though, as well. Mark Twain tells us that courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not absence of fear. The self-help writer Susan Jeffers has popularized the slogan that I really enjoy that says, "Feel the fear and do it anyway." Regardless of which message one adheres to, there is a deep commonality. Fear is real. Fear is present. And in order to be successful in our lives' work, it must be addressed, whether by divine intervention or by our own diligent attention. There are certainly things that we Unitarian Universalists are afraid of. We're afraid of our own sustainability as a religion. We're afraid of what is happening to our planet, even as we remember the many examples of symbiosis that we heard as here, my understanding is with Reverend Hannah last week. And I imagine all of us can think of a thing or two that we believe Unitarian Universalists are afraid of. Today, I want to reflect on the fear of talking about Palestine, Israel, and Zionism. I want to offer some thoughts on where the fear comes from, how that fear hurts both us as a faith tradition and hurts others outside of Unitarian Universalism, and some steps that we can take not only to alleviate our fear, but to take action in the name of justice. A great place to begin is why. Why are we afraid of this conversation? Why are we afraid to talk about a place so often called the Holy Land? I think one of the first answers is that we feel we do not know enough. What we do know is that Jewish people have been oppressed throughout a very long history, generation after generation after generation. We know that the Holocaust was an unforgivable human act that went on unhindered because of the vehement anti-Semitism that existed all around this world, including right here in our own country. We know that the Bible tells a story of a Jewish kingdom in Canaan, the land we understand to be where Palestine and Israel are today. We know the stories that the media tells us each day about so-called terrorist Palestinians and victim Israelis, but beyond that, we as a collective have incredibly divergent information and understandings. Some of us, among us, read the electronic intifada on a day-to-day basis. Others of us read the Jerusalem Post. And there are those of us whose knowledge of Israel, Palestine, and Zionism are only what we get in passing from mainstream media, coworkers, family, friends. When someone gets up in the pulpit to talk about Zionism, or when we hear about the ideology of Zionism in other places, many of us do not know our history or have an understanding of what we're really talking about. Today's sermon, to be honest, is not an answer to all of this lack of knowledge. Rather, I suggest that we as a faith tradition have an obligation to educate ourselves as a step towards alleviating our fear. When we have more information, we can more authentically engage, and to do so is a moral imperative. Our fear is not only lack of knowledge. As Unitarian Universalists, we often choose social justice campaigns that will not make people within our congregations too uncomfortable. While same-sex marriage may have been a deeply controversial aspect of justice on a larger scale, within our own tradition, it was not something that really ruffled too many feathers. The anti-racism work we have done, however, that has made many people uncomfortable, to the point that resources from the Unitarian Universalist Association on a national level have been redirected out of programming and curriculum that was actively challenging our congregations to truly engage in anti-racist education and mobilization. Talking about and taking a position on what is happening in Palestine and Israel makes us very uncomfortable, even in the face of unprecedented bombing in the Gaza Strip. But I want you to take a moment and reflect on the differences between being uncomfortable at church and being unsafe at church. I would suggest that being uncomfortable at church from time to time is an essential part of our growth as Unitarian Universalists. Being uncomfortable means that we are being pushed outside of our comfort zones. It means we are being challenged on assumptions we have made. It means we have to adjust our bodies, maybe fidget a little bit. It means our body temperatures may rise and sweat accumulate on our foreheads. It might even mean we cry sometimes or raise our voices. To be uncomfortable is okay. Being unsafe, though, that is different. Our congregations need to be places of sanctuary, homes for exploration and community. When we are unsafe, our inherent worth and dignity is threatened. When we are unsafe, our capacity to move, autonomy over our bodies is taken from us. When we are unsafe, other people hold all the power and control. Our congregations need to be places where we are safe, where boundaries and expectations are clear. The safer we are, the easier it is to practice being uncomfortable together. Mark Braverman, whose book Fatal Embrace will be referenced a few times this morning, recognizes that many non-Jews who challenge any aspect of the state of Israel have a great fear of being labeled anti-Semitic. I know this fear in a very real way. I've wrestled with such accusations in the past due to some of the solidarity work I've been involved in. Even as I believe it is not anti-Semitic to act in solidarity with Palestinians and critique the state of Israel, I also have the responsibility of interrogating the ways that I have been, as a non-Jew, taught anti-Semitism throughout my life. Just as I have internalized racist beliefs as a white person living in the world, I am aware that I have internalized anti-Semitic beliefs as a non-Jew. And just as overcoming the multi-generational internalization around race is a lifelong journey, so too is the work of overcoming internalized anti-Semitism. Unitarian Universalists as individuals and UUism as a faith movement have a responsibility to confront anti-Semitism on personal, interpersonal, institutional, and cultural levels. This commitment, though, need not keep us from paying attention to what is happening with hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. government military aid going to Israel. I think this fear of being labeled anti-Semitic has some roots in a collective sense of guilt. When we learn about the atrocities of the Holocaust, it is difficult not to feel guilty that for many of us, our ancestors were either complicit in or actively involved in violence against Jewish people. We may feel guilty about living with the privileges we have while others experience oppression. We may have feelings of guilt as Unitarian Universalists, those among us who were raised Jewish but left the faith and are struggling with the realities of identity transformation. However, we must move beyond guilt. Black lesbian feminist poet Audre Lorde reminds us that guilt is only another way of avoiding informed action, of buying time out of the pressing need to make clear choices, out of the approaching storm that can feed the earth as well as bend the truth. We need to embody her words and work to move beyond this guilt, both as individuals and as a faith tradition. When we choose to be silent about Palestine, Israel, and Zionism, we are not only hurting others, we are hurting ourselves. Marilyn Buck, an anti-racist organizer and former political prisoner, shows her understanding of the interconnectedness of her privileged humanity with the marginalized humanity of others when she writes, "If we stopped police brutality, if Black women and men were treated like equal human beings, that would make me feel really good because I would be less dehumanized as a white person in this society. I would not be objectified as the oppressor." The people of Palestine are under occupation and are suffering. I do not want to be dehumanized as part of that oppression. I want to align with liberation. I can remember the first time that someone referred to Gaza as the world's largest open-air prison. As an abolitionist, that called me to learn more, to engage, to speak up. Mark Braverman, writing as a Jewish theologian about Jewish people, claims, "We want to see ourselves as universalist and humanitarian, in possession of a religious faith that is based on deep respect for human rights and a fundamental, defining commitment to universal justice." He continues, "We also, however, persist in supporting the policies of the Israeli government, policies that violate the human rights of Palestinians, support the ongoing colonization and occupation and violation of international law." He goes on by reminding us that American Jews have not created this situation by ourselves. We have been enabled by our Christian, and I would say Unitarian, compatriots who, because of their sense of responsibility for historical anti-Semitism, feel that they have no right to criticize any actions that Israel may take, even when these actions violate principles of human rights and justice. While we as Unitarian Universalists may not all be Christian, this message is indeed for us as well. How can we claim to adhere to a religious tradition that values justice, equity, and compassion in human relations when we remain silent about the atrocities occurring under our noses? Whether you're a humanist, a theist, agnostic, or celebrate the interconnectedness of life through earth-based traditions, you can recognize that we suffer as a global community when oppression goes unchallenged. The late Howard Zinn, historian revered by many, constantly reminded us that we cannot be neutral on a moving train. Unitarian Universalists and our faith movement as a whole are on this moving train, and we have a responsibility to make a conscious choice. Are we ready to talk about the realities of Israel's occupation of Palestine and its rooted ideology of Zionism, or are we going to choose to be complicit? In 1997, the General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association passed a resolution toward an anti-racist Unitarian Universalist Association. Within this resolution, we are called to recognize the social, economic, and ecological health of our planet is imperiled by the deepening divisions in our world caused by inequitable and unjust distribution of power and resources. Beloved, Unitarian Universalists have a responsibility to see what Israel is doing in Palestine as a manifestation of this global peril. It is clear that as a faith, we are living up to our call for social witness in many areas. It has been amazing to watch UUs rise up in solidarity with migrant communities, defend democracy, protect abortion access. However, anti-oppression work and witness is not something we just get to put a nice check mark next to. It's an ongoing multi-issue struggle that will likely never see an end in our lifetimes. If we are to do this work for the long haul, then we need to recognize and celebrate our accomplishments. And as we celebrate, we need to be reinvigorated to keep the work going, knowing, to quote Audre Lorde again, that we cannot have single-issue politics because we do not live single-issue lives. Before I take some time to talk about the important steps we can take as people of faith and as a religion, I do want to say a word about what Zionism is. If we are to have a conversation about what is happening in Palestine and Israel, we have to include an analysis of the ideology of Zionism. This is a nationalist ideology that has been pushing for a Jewish state since the late 19th century, with Theodor Herzl as the founding thinker. Zionism functions with many different perspectives, from religious to labor, revisionist to green, and many more. However, rooted in it all is a colonial claim to Palestine. In May of 1948, the plan to seize and gain control of Palestine happened a day that Palestinians call the Nakba, the catastrophe in Arabic. This catastrophe resulted in land theft and the displacement of 700,000 Palestinians. An ideology that is rooted in this kind of destruction can't go undiscussed by our people and by us. Mark Braverman encourages his readers that indeed anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are not the same. Even while under attack by other people in his own community, he writes, "Here is the crux of the matter. Jewish nationalism as expressed in the state of Israel is in conflict with our modern values of fairness, universalism, and commitment to human rights." He tells story upon story of Palestinian homes demolished in the name of Jewish protection. He shares with readers about the suffering of Palestinian children who kiss their mothers goodbye and then do the best they can to get to school while navigating tanks and the occupation of Israeli soldiers. He shows the realities of what it means for Palestinians to wake up at checkpoints and have their land invaded by a giant concrete wall. He reminds us that all of this is happening in the name of a modern Zionism. Beyond Braverman's writings, and it is my prayer that you, who have borne witness to even some of the violence going on as Israel bombs hospitals, schools, and mosques during this most recent campaign in Gaza, that we will be moved. So what must we do? As I mentioned earlier, we must educate ourselves. We must organize and mobilize our congregations to gain more information. We must sit with our own histories, the histories of the land and the histories of resistance. We must learn about suffering and oppression. We must share openly and be gentle with each other. And we must recognize that we're going to be uncomfortable. We need to train our ministers and our lay leaders how to be nurturing and loving while also challenging their congregations. We need to live into the practice of comforting the afflicted while afflicting the comfortable, even as we recognize that those are not static conditions. And I will say that we need to make a choice. We're not choosing between loving our Jewish family or our Palestinian family. There is no question that we must and always love both. We do have a responsibility to choose between oppression and justice. This means making hard choices. If we wish to live true to our principles, we must not be neutral. Our Unitarian Universalism is shaped by our willingness to make choices, our reverence of reason and relationship with mystery steers us towards moments of choice. Challenging the realities of Zionism and occupation of Palestine by Israel is our religious and community responsibility, not only for the liberation of Palestinians, but for the liberation of each and every one of us. When faced with these choices, I'm hopeful we will choose liberation, not with fearlessness, but with courage and conviction.